All right. Hey, welcome. Thank you for joining today. Our lesson title is The Boy Jesus. And so we're going to be taking a look at a story here of Jesus in his childhood. The the month of lessons is Wisdom in the Gospels. Last month we were looking at wisdom in Proverbs, and this month we're looking at wisdom in the Gospels. And so today's lesson is on the boy Jesus. We're going to be looking at two verses in Ecclesiastes, and then we're going to be looking at the story in Luke, Luke chapter 2. But before we get started, let's start with the word of prayer. Lord, we thank you for this day. Thank you for the opportunity to study your word and to look into what Ecclesiastes and Luke have to say. I pray that as we get into this and discuss, Lord, that we can pull something out that we can look at and get encouragement for us in our lives to become better followers of you. Lord, bless this discussion and our time together. In your name I pray. Amen. All right. Yeah, good job. We're going to start off here with rhythms and cycles in your life. So I'm just curious, what rhythms and cycles do you find important in your life?
The sleep.
What do you think, Steve?
The sleep cycle.
The sleep cycle. 12 hours of sleep every night, right?
That's right. That's right. For Elaine too, right, Phil?
Yeah, but that's not working in this house. So.
The sleep cycle, yeah.
So the sleep cycle, that's a big cycle there, isn't it? Yeah. Any other cycles or rhythms? Yeah.
The eating cycle or the eating rhythm.
What about the coffee drinking rhythm there, Steve?
No, not me, man.
Not you.
I don't do coffee. I do tea. So I don't know. Maybe Phil and Elaine do the coffee.
Yeah, we do coffee, and I don't sleep much, but I find that a cold water face wash and a cup of coffee, and I'm ready to go.
Yeah. And if you don't have that, it takes a little bit to get going, huh?
It does take a little longer, yeah.
Yeah. Any other rhythms or cycles in your life? As I was thinking about this, and some of them that I teach high school agricultural science, and fairs. The FFA organization has a national convention every year in October, the last week in October, and so that tends to be a busy time. The Pennsylvania Farm Show is always right after New Year's Day, and so when that comes around, there's a certain feel to that. For me, grading cycles and grading quarters have a certain cycle to them, and I tell you, it's very interesting. In our FFA chapter, we sell fruit, and traditionally, the fruit comes in. I have to have the fruit order in before Thanksgiving, and it comes a couple weeks later. And Thanksgiving is not a set date on the calendar. It moves. And so there are years when Thanksgiving is very early, and there are years when Thanksgiving is very late. And when Thanksgiving's very late, I can tell the cycle that I've built up. There's not as much time in between when I have to have my fruit order in when the fruit comes, and so it just throws me off a little bit. It's just very interesting how that works, and I also feel that with Easter as well. When Easter is really early, there's a different feel to the year than when Easter is really late. And I don't know if any of you guys can relate to that or not, but especially for me and what I do when Thanksgiving is, I think it's when it's really late. It really messes up my cycle and thought pattern and all that. It's just really weird how that works. I think about Sunday school, not Sunday, church services. Sunday school with that, but church services. church happens on Sunday. And when you don't have that, at least when I don't have that, and that regular time and coming in with church in that week, my cycle for the week gets messed up. And I remember my dad talking about that as well. He would say, I think it was when he went out to wheat harvest when he was younger. And I think they may have cut wheat on a Sunday. And so there was a period of time where he didn't go to church on Sundays. And I just remember him talking about that really messed up his rhythm because, he was used to going to church on Sunday, and now they were working, trying to get the wheat in. And it's just interesting how that cycle messes up with you. I was thinking here, planting and harvest in agriculture. I was just out last week and earlier this week helping to bale straw. And I know that around the July 4th, that's when we're baling straw. And for our family with potatoes, August is the time that we're digging potatoes. And so the cycle of planting and harvest, it becomes a rhythm in life. And when that gets disrupted one way or the other, it really messes up plans sometimes. Any other cycles, as I was talking, anything else jot your mind to any cycle or rhythm in your life?
Yeah, the VBS, prepping for every year. Usually after the first of the year, the new year, you start, planning for vacation Bible school, and then that builds up until the summer, and then you have a few months breather, and then the new year happens and you start over again. And that's always a pretty big event.
Yeah. The second part to my to this thinking about rhythms and cycles is what happens when these get disrupted. When there are certain rhythms and cycles in your life that get broken, or they don't happen as you think. I gave you the example of when Thanksgiving is late. My whole thinking. I think also Thanksgiving, when it's late, there's not as many weeks in between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and so that makes the school tighter too. And it's just a weird feeling. And these last 4 months, a lot of things have gotten disrupted for people, and I'm just it's kind of interesting. What have we learned from these last 4 months about disruptions in our rhythm and cycle of life? I've heard a lot of people say that they have more free time. The things that they had planned to do either got canceled or they can't do it, and so there's more time to spend with family or do hobbies or some other things like that. When we get into a pattern in life and we have these cycles and rhythms, and then these disruptions come about, our attitude is going to be everything in that. Are we going to take it and look at this as an opportunity to do something different, or is this something that we're going to be like, I can't wait to get back into that old rhythm and get back into that cycle? I don't know. It's just an interesting thing here to think about with this. And so rhythms and cycles, that's kind of what we see here in Ecclesiastes 3. And so that's what I'm going to read here first. So let's start with the Ecclesiastes 3. And we're going to look at verses 1 and 7. That's what's in our lesson text today. But I might read some more with this. Ecclesiastes is a book that's written by Solomon. And as we look at Ecclesiastes, it's really good to make sure that as we study that we look at the whole thing. If we only take bits and pieces of Ecclesiastes, we might think that King Solomon says that nothing is, or everything is meaningless, and you miss the point of what Ecclesiastes comes about there. And in the end of Ecclesiastes, if you look at chapter 12, verse 1, King Solomon concludes that the purpose of human life is to remember the Creator before our lives slip away. If you only take the little snippets of Ecclesiastes, you might think that King Solomon again is saying that everything is meaningless and that nothing matters, and come away with that with a down spirit maybe. But King Solomon does conclude, and I like this here, that the purpose of human life is to remember the Creator before our lives slip away from us in our rhythms and in the cycles that we have. And so let's take a look here at Ecclesiastes 3, and we're going to look at. I'm going to read the first 8 verses here because I think this there might be something to speak to us here.
Hey Ryan, did you see
Yes.
Ecclesiastes 12:12?
No, what's that say?
It says, "Of making many books there is no end, and much study wearies the body." That's a
I
good
see
verse
that.
for you teachers.
I see that.
Just keep that in mind.
Oh my!
Sorry about
Yes,
that.
yes. No, that's good. A lot of good things in there, isn't there?
I guess there is. That was my verse in college.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And how'd your professors think about that?
They didn't like that.
They didn't like that too much, probably.
No, not at all.
That's good. Let's look at Ecclesiastes 3, verse 1 through 8. Verse 1, there is a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. That's what Ecclesiastes 3, 1 to 8 says. And so, just real quickly there, is there anything that sticks out to anyone here that stuck out to you?
Well, he's like explaining, this is sort of the way it is in life. That, there's a time for all these things.
Yeah.
In one way, he's stating that there's going to be a lot of unpleasant things happen, but yet there's also going to be a time for, good things to happen.
Yeah. Good. What, as we look at this, and just in this verses 1 through 8, it strikes me here that these things are going to happen regardless of what people do. A lot of times we look at this and say it's out of our control. It's something that's going to happen. Now, there are some things here that we can be active in with, but if you look at 1 through 8, these times that come about, there is a certain piece there of not having control over what happens here.
And part of life would be accepting them.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, that's a great point, Phil, that hey, these things are going to happen. So it's part of life. So yeah, accept them, deal with them. That's a great point.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, today, for our lesson, we're looking at verses 1 and 7. So let's start here with verse 1. Verse 1 is, there's a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. And again, as we look at this is the same Hebrew parallelism that we have seen before in Proverbs and in other places, poetry there in Hebrew. And so as we look at this, time goes with the season, and everything goes with every activity. So the two things that are being written here complement each other with this. Life begins, develops, and ends in largely consistent cycles. And we see those cycles through there. If you look down through, you know, there's in verse 2, there's my good old agricultural metaphor there, a time to plant and a time to uproot. And I'm doing that in my garden right now. You know, I look back at pictures. Kim took some pictures of when I planted the garden. That was only 60 days ago. And now I'm picking out things and uprooting things, and now it's time to be done. And that's not a very, very long amount of time. And so life, you know, begins, develops, ends in largely consistent cycles. And what Solomon gets across here, and kind of what Phil alluded to here, is that wise people know and understand this. Wise people know and understand this, that there's a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. And then verse 2 to 8 goes about all those different activities. Wise people know and understand this. And so my question here is this: how do you learn from others' experience? How do we go about learning this? If wise people know and understand this, that there are these cycles, largely consistent cycles in life, how do we go about learning that from others' experience? Any thoughts?
It's a very important part of being a Christian. If you're going to witness to other people, there needs to be some acceptance and peace with every part of life.
Mm-hmm.
My mother used to say, you keep your four corners, keep a balanced life, family, work, God, and play.
Mm-hmm.
Balance those, you'll have a balanced life. And that will show up. I think I see people who are overworked, and sometimes it seems like there's just not time to enjoy.
Right.
Slave to what you're doing, and sometimes we get. I'd say men probably do this more than women. You get involved in your work, and you can overload yourself before you know it, if there's not checks and balances there.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
if we're going to be a witness, we need to be particular about what we say and do, and action speaks louder than words. People are looking and seeing how you handle every phase of life.
Yeah, for sure. That was one of the things, as I was thinking about this, I was thinking of my own life. You know, how do I learn from others' experience? What are some of those things? And you know, one of the things that was thinking of here is walking with a person going through something. You know, you were talking about, Phil, there about people seeing your actions and how you respond to certain situations in life. And as I reflect on, you know, how do I learn from others' experience? Some of that is walking through that experience with others and seeing how do they react to that? How do they respond? And so I think that's important. Yeah.
And the other side of that is you need to help them through it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
A friend of mine I've known 48 years just had half his spleen and half of his pancreas removed, and waiting to know whether it's cancer or not.
Gotcha.
And went to Philly on Sunday and picked him up from the hospital and stopped out at his house first to get his car. And his wife was a nervous wreck. She was beside herself. It's like she couldn't do anything. And she's Christian, but she just didn't find a peace with even, it seemed like she was just so nervous about him coming home.
Yeah.
How's he going to react, and what are the demands going to be, and how do we get through this? So
Right.
You know, you try and be a calming influence and assure them that you're there for them, whatever that looks like, and do the best you can with helping them through those things.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Some other things that, as I was reflecting on this, on how do we learn from others' experience? How do we become wise people that know and understand these cycles in life? You know, I put down here listening to stories of people that have gone through different things. With this time of quarantining and other things that come along with the coronavirus and all that. It was interesting hearing about stories of people in World War II and living through that time, and some of the things that they had to do. My wife's grandparents were here this past weekend, and they were talking about them. They were young during World War II, but they remember the air raid drills at night, and everyone had to turn lights off and nothing was on the road and all that. And just hearing how they went through that time of uncertainty for a number of years. I mean, what World War II went for 4 years or so, and all the things that went along with that. And yeah, I think listening to stories and listening to people and how they dealt with some of these cycles of life are very important. Parents and parenting, and you hear stories and you ask people for advice of, how did you handle this situation, or what did you do, and all that. And we found that being very helpful with other people that have older kids than what we do, and finding out, some of the stuff that we're going through or challenges we're facing is nothing new, and here's how they faced them. And that's really good. I mean, parenting is a cycle of life there as well. So listening to stories, I have here, finding a mentor or someone that you can be accountability partner can be something there. Had here walk with a person going through something almost like an apprentice. There's a big push today in education for apprentices and apprenticeships and the trades today, and really pushing that. And an apprentice is someone who, well, if we looked at the old time apprentice, they lived with the person, the master, and worked with them for really close by, and often think using that analogy in our community and Christian walk here of being an apprentice, that we can learn from others and learn how they dealt with some of these life cycles. And part of it, that I often hear about, and I've been hearing on the radio some sermons too, is how do we do kind of like what you were doing there, Phil, with when it comes to health and life and death type of things, and how do we be the encouragers and the support system for people going through those types of things. Walking alongside of a person as they're going through that, being that encourager, I think is a really good way that we become wise in how to deal with those situations. So that starts off this 8-verse window here in Ecclesiastes 3. Our lesson today is going to look and highlight more of this second part of verse 7, which says, a time to be silent and a time to speak. All right, a time to be silent and a time to speak. What we're looking at here is communication. And communication is very important for us, right? As we're working and living and worshiping in community, communication is very, very important. And I believe that we can get a lot across by speaking, and we can probably get just the same amount across and being silent as well. With that, there's a question here that I want to bring up.
I don't know if my wife would agree with you though. Okay, we'll go with it.
Well, here, maybe this is for you, Steve. Which problem do you most need to work on? Recognizing when to keep silent or recognizing when to speak up?
Yeah, probably both those things. I speak at the wrong time, and I'm silent at the wrong time. Yeah.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. You know, when we speak, I think there's a certain level of control, isn't it? And so maybe our default mode when we're dealing with a problem or dealing with a situation is to speak, and we feel that we can get more across that way. But it's interesting, in Ecclesiastes says there's a time to be silent as well, and maybe we can get more across if we're silent. I don't know.
It's one thing that I have learned is to listen more, not jump in and speak and take over a conflict, but just to listen more. I was
Yeah.
at a Promise Keepers conference down in DC, and one of the speakers got up and he went to the microphone and just stood there, didn't say a thing. All of a sudden the guy started chanting, and it was just it was awkward. He said, I'm practicing what James says is to be slow to speak
Mm-hmm.
and quick to listen.
Mm-hmm.
He said, God gave us 2 ears, only 1 mouth. So maybe we should listen twice as much as we speak.
Mm-hmm.
That has always impacted me. And ever since I heard that, it's like, yeah, that's very true.
Yeah. Time to be silent and time to speak. Okay, so that's the beginning here in Ecclesiastes, and that leads us to wisdom in the Gospels, and we're going to look at the boy Jesus. So let's turn to Luke 2. That's where our lesson text is going to come from. We're looking at Luke 2, verses 39 to 52. So let me go ahead and read that for us right now. Luke 2, verse 39. When Joseph and Mary had done everything required by the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee, to their own town of Nazareth. And the child grew and became strong. He was filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. Every year his parents went to Jerusalem for the feast of the Passover. When he was 12 years old, they went up to the feast according to the custom. After the feast was over, while his parents were returning home, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but they were unaware of it. Thinking he was in their company, they traveled on for a day. Then they began looking for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple court sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. His mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you." "Why were you searching for me?" he asked. "Didn't you know I had to be in my father's house?" But they did not understand what he was saying to them. Then he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. But his mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and men. So, as I was looking at this here, I often have questions that when I meet Jesus, I'm going to have to ask him, because I don't know if I'll ever know on this side of glory the answers with it. But I remember talking with my dad about this a number of times, and just who Jesus was, right? And what, as Jesus was growing up, what was he like as a child? All right, I distinctly remember, there's the Christmas Carol, "Way in the Manger," and there's one line in "Way in the Manger" of that Jesus doesn't cry, and you're like, there's no scriptural basis to that, and it got me thinking, well, did Jesus ever cry? That would be interesting. I often think about, how did Jesus interact with his siblings? Did he get mad with his siblings like I get mad with my siblings and start throwing punches and all that? And what kind of discipline did Mary and Joseph have to do with Jesus as they were growing up? And one question, when did Jesus realize who he was and what he was sent here to do? And is, I don't know. Anyone else ever think about questions like that of Jesus growing up? And the Bible doesn't say a whole lot about his childhood. We have this one story right here in the Gospels of time when he was 12 years old. Think back when you were 12 years old. How did you act and react to situations when you were 12? Probably not how Jesus would react, right?
Yeah, I think it would be really hard to be in Jesus' family knowing that Jesus was perfect. You could never blame him for anything,
So you would not want to have Jesus as a sibling, is what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, you can't blame Jesus because he's like, well, I'm perfect. I can't do that, or I didn't do that. But
yeah,
one of the things that you read, Ryan, it's like, and he was obedient to them. They went on Nazareth with them, and he was obedient to them.
Yeah.
You think about it. I mean, that was, Jesus didn't start his public ministry until he was, 30 years old?
Yeah, something like that, I think is what they say, yeah.
Yeah, so not only through his teenage years, but even through his 20s.
Yeah.
He lived with, with Mary anyway. We don't know about how long Joseph was there, but
right.
And he was obedient to her as his mother, and
yeah.
That's quite fascinating.
Yeah. No, exactly right. And again, at least in the Bible here, we don't have a whole lot of his upbringing and such, but there was a colleague of mine at school that often postured that, Jesus, up until his ministry started there when he was 30, it's believed that he worked in the same business as his father did. And his belief was that he was going through and saving up money and resources for him to do his ministry for those 3 years, going through there. And I never thought of it that way. Now, again, it's not scriptural. And I mean, you're not going to, as far as I know, in the Gospels, it doesn't say anything that Jesus did that. But, you think that he didn't start his public ministry until 30. It's very, very possible that, here at when he was 12 years old, we know at 12 years old that he knew who his father was. And I fully believe that he knew what his path in life was going to be. That, he was that focused that maybe for those years before starting his ministry, he was working towards supporting himself for ministry and all. I don't know. It was very interesting. And hearing my colleague talk about, Jesus' time, like you said, there, Steve, in his 20s, and what would he be doing? I don't know.
Probably supporting Mary too.
Yeah.
I guess legend has it that Joseph died at some point, and so he was probably supporting Mary and any other siblings that were still at home.
Yeah. And I don't know. There's just a lot of those questions of that we just won't have answers to. But it's interesting here to think about, and I'm glad that we have this story here in Luke of at least one aspect of his childhood and what had gone on there in his childhood. And so we're just gonna go through this verse by verse and see what we can learn here. So we'll start with verse 39. If you look at the story before, it says Jesus is presented in the temple, and I really like what it does say. So in my Bible, that heading starts in verse 21. When we look at verse 39, we see it says that Joseph and Mary had done everything required by the law of the Lord. And part of that is for Mary for a ceremonial cleanliness. If you want to take a look at Leviticus 12:1-8, it talks about what women had to do to become ceremonially clean after giving childbirth, and Mary and Joseph followed that. They circumcised Jesus here on the 8th day, and that was spelled out in the law. And we see the intentional actions of Mary and Joseph here in raising their family in accordance to the law, the Jewish law here at that time. And so we see very intentional parenting, following after their beliefs here. I think we can find some encouragement as parents here that to raise kids in a Christian home and make sure that we're doing those things in our those customs, their traditions, those types of things in our church for them, to give them a good solid foundation. We see in verse 47, when we get there, it says everyone who heard them was amazed. Even though Jesus is the Son of God here, I'm 100% sure that the foundation that Mary and Joseph provided for Jesus really impacted that as well. And so, I hope that we can see some encouragement right there in verse 39, that even though Mary and Joseph had their son Jesus, who is the Son of God, they still provided this foundation of faith and this foundation for Jesus in their home. You see in verse 41, it says every year they went to the Passover. And so these traditions in their culture, in the Jewish law at that time, they were following that, and they were being intentional about that. It says here in verse 39, when they had done everything required by the law, they returned to Galilee, to their own town of Nazareth. That's where they were from. That's where they lived. That's where Jesus grew up. And so they were going to return. They returned there. And in verse 40, the child grew and became strong. He was filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. And so, as we think about what does that look like in a child, a child grows, right? You can see that physically, a child growing. I have a little boy who's 1.5 years old, and every time I look at him, he changes. It almost feels. He's been growing and all that, and Audrey as well. She's 4 and she's growing, and there's a lot of growth in those years. And so we can see that in the child grew, there's this physical growth for sure, and it says there becomes strong. Yeah, and how does a child become strong? Of course, there's that physical strength, but there's that mental strength that comes along, and speaking and all that. And we see that happening here with Jesus. Jesus grew and he became strong. It says he was filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. I would just add a note here, filled with wisdom. What's that look like? What does a wise 10-year-old boy look like?
Yeah. Way ahead of himself.
Way ahead of
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I've just loved to peek in to see Jesus' childhood and how different it must have been. And for Mary and Joseph being as parents and knowing who Jesus is. They know who Jesus is. And just the differences. I think it would just be interesting, fascinating. Filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. And maybe that grace kept them protected and safe through those growing up years too. But that's what we see here, and that's what we start off with Jesus' childhood. Now we get into verse 41. Verse 41, we have here, every year his parents went to Jerusalem for the feast of the Passover. All right, so we have here, again, we see this every year. And that just reiterates here the intentional actions and the intentionality of Jesus' parents to provide this foundation of faith and the law and Jewish custom into Jesus. Again, this contributes to Jesus' upbringing And again, I think we can find encouragement in that even Mary and Joseph, who had Jesus as the Son of God, needed to provide that foundation. How much more do we need to provide that Christian foundation for our students and kids? Yeah. We have there the Passover. And so there were 3 feasts that the Jews had that were commanded to follow. If you read back in Deuteronomy 16, you find out that there was a commandment from God to observe 3 feasts. One of them was the Passover. One of them was the Feast of the Weeks, or sometimes called the Feast of Pentecost. And then the other one was the Feast of Tabernacles. And so these 3 feasts were ones that Jewish people at the time would go and make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Passover, obviously, is the feast of when, or commemorating when they left Egypt. The angel of death passed over all the houses that had the blood of the lamb on the doorway, and so those families were spared the death of the firstborn. And it was directly after that plague that Pharaoh let the people go and leave Egypt. We have the Feast of the Weeks, or Feast of Pentecost, and this is a thanksgiving of first fruits of wheat at the time. It also commemorates the time that the law was given to Moses on Mount Sinai. And so those were this was happening right around the wheat harvest, so the first fruits of wheat, which was important for bread making and that type of thing, but also the time that the law of God was given to Moses. And then we have the Feast of the Tabernacles, which commemorates the shelter during the 40 years in the wilderness. Also happened after a period of harvest time as well, and so giving thanks to God for protection through the 40 years in the wilderness, and then also for a harvest of food. So these 3 feasts, adult males and their families were to follow. And for some folks that were further away from Jerusalem, taking 3 times in a year to go and travel to Jerusalem became very tough. But if you were going to do any of them, the Passover one was the biggest one. That was seen as the one that if you were going to do any kind of celebration, that was the one that you would do. And so that's what we see here. Every year, his parents went to Jerusalem for the feast of the Passover. So it says in verse 42, when he was 12 years old, they went up to the feast according to the custom. All right, so the custom was to go to the feast. You'll see here up and down, up and down. Jerusalem was higher up than Nazareth. And so if you look at a map, Nazareth is actually north of Jerusalem. And here in United States, we often think up as being north and down as being south. I guess it depends on where you live too, but for me, up was always north and down was always south. But geography here plays a role, and Jerusalem is at a higher elevation than Nazareth. And so every time you see Jesus going up to Jerusalem from Galilee, that's the reason why he was traveling uphill to get there. It was also it was a long way away. I looked up to see how far Nazareth was from Jerusalem, and I believe as the crow flies, it's 60 miles, but driving today on the roads, it's 90 miles. And so I don't know how far people can walk in a day. I was trying to calculate that in my head, and I think 10 miles a day, a leisurely walk, I think you can do 10 miles a day. And so if you take that and let's say the shortest distance, 60 miles, you're looking at a 6-day journey walking from Nazareth to Jerusalem with that. And it'd probably be a little bit longer with that. So keep that in mind too as we continue on the story. But we see here that this is 12 years old. And so I'm just curious, is there, why 12? What might be a significance of 12 here? In Jewish custom, when does a boy become a man? At what age? What do you think, Steve? 13. Yes, 13. Right. At this point in time, the bar mitzvah and that celebration is not established in Jewish tradition, but 13 was kind of seen as a time that a boy became a man. And so in today's Jewish traditions, you have a big celebration, bar mitzvah, with that. And so we see here 12, and I think that's significant here because at this point, Jesus is not necessarily in his culture and his tradition seen as a man. He's seen as a boy still. And so 12 years old, he goes with his parents, just like he did all the other years. So this is probably his 12th time doing this, right? Going up to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover. And so when he's 12 years old, something a little bit different here happens. Verse 43. Verse 43, we see Jesus, let me get the notes here, returning, Jesus not returning, his parents, right? After the feast was over, his parents were returning home. The boy, Jesus, stayed behind Jerusalem, but they were unaware of it. All right, and again, this is a 6-day, at least minimum trip. Why was they unaware? Anyone leave a kid at home, like a home alone situation, or forget someone? It'd be a little spooky, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I had that happen. It was another family where they left their son in, like children's church area. She thought he was picking him up. He thought she was picking him up, and they came in separate vehicles because he had to come early for something. And so they both got home and realized they left their son at church. So, and all of a sudden the phone started ringing. It's like, hey, yes, he's here. We have him. So, I really would not have want to been in that household when they both got home and realized that they left their son back at church. But
your heart would stop there for a little bit, wouldn't it?
That did happen.
Yeah. As we look at this, I think we need to remember how they traveled too. They traveled in big groups. Probably a lot of the town. I could see Mary and Joseph with a big group of them leaving Jerusalem on this trek back home, and a lot of people together, and knowing that their kids are with others, and not thinking about it, and not being too worried about it. But at some point they had to stop and camp out for the night because they weren't going to just continue going through the night walking. And at that point, trying to take a head count and figure out where everyone's at. I don't think we need to be too hard on Mary and Joseph here at this point in time of not knowing where Jesus is, because I would think that 12 years before this they've done the same sort of thing, and there was no malicious intent, I think, on any part of the party here in the story. We see here, we continue on in verse 44, thinking he was in their company, they traveled on for a day. Then they began looking for him among their relatives and friends. That's a long trip. I mean, that's a long period of time. And realizing that Jesus is not with them after a day of travel. I think it would work on. I had a professor in college when he was an ag science teacher. The National FFA convention was out in Kansas City, Missouri. And he tells us the story that he went with a couple other groups from Pennsylvania by train out to Kansas City. And as they were boarding the train in Kansas City to come back home, he was taking a head count and he couldn't find the one kid. And he was telling us a story as pre-service teachers and just relaying it back to him. And he said, boy, I had this sinking feeling in my gut. This was back in the 60s or 70s when there was no cell phones and other things. He couldn't just get off the train to look for this kid. And so the train wasn't going to wait. And he said he left the station knowing that he had one kid not accounted for. And, he had to go home. And so he was traveling home and he was trying to think, what am I going to do? Here he comes, find out that the kid was with one of the other groups on another car in the train, and I don't know if it was halfway or so. He found out, and it was all good. But he said just that, trying to make that decision on do I leave or do I stay or what do I do? It's an unnerving feeling, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And Mary and Joseph, I'm sure, had a sinking feeling in their gut, in their heart, right here, as well. They were thinking that Jesus was with someone else, and they've been traveling for a day, and now at night they're settling down and trying to find and realize that, he's not with us, and the thoughts that go through your head. Hey, I want to take just a period here, a prayer. Live, there's this missing Amish girl up in Bird in Hand, Linda Stolzfus, and as I was reading this and at least going through this, I was reading some things online of some people that know the family really well, and some of the what that family's going through right now. And I know there's some other cases of missing children in the area as well. So why don't we just take a moment here, just let's pray for the Stolzfus family and Linda, and pray for her speedy recovery with that. So let's pray. Lord, where Linda's at right now, and I just pray that you keep her safe wherever she's at. Lord, I pray that she'll be found and brought back to the family very quickly and speedily, and I just pray your extra dose of comfort and peace that only you can provide for Linda's family right now. So, Lord, I just pray for the people that are searching and people that are waiting. Lord, for others in the area that have missing children as well. Lord, I pray that you keep them safe and give their families just that abundant peace that only you can provide. Thank you, Lord. Amen.
Amen.
It's Mary and Joseph at this point realize Jesus isn't with them, and they're a day in the travel, and I could just it's hard to explain that sinking feeling that they have. And what would you do? What would you do at this point? Well, we see what they did here in verse 45. When they did not find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him. And so I can just imagine other kids here at this time, they find people to take them back home, and Mary and Joseph are running off as quick as they can, going back into the city in Jerusalem. Verse 46, we see there after 3 days. Some commentators say that this 3 days is a day back. It was the day out of Jerusalem, traveling out of Jerusalem until they realized Jesus was not there. It was a day back into Jerusalem. That's the second day. And then the third day was going around the city looking for him. And that very well could be what it is. But in either case, unless it was just 3 days looking in Jerusalem, there were 2 nights that Mary and Joseph had to try somehow go to sleep, not knowing where their son was. And so we see here 3 days. And 3 days, there's also this foreshadowing of Jesus, the 3 days between Jesus' death and resurrection there as well. A lot of times we see that here, foreshadowing or similarities in the Bible. It says after 3 days, they find him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers. And what was Jesus doing there? Jesus was listening, and he was asking them questions. And I like that, going back to this part here that we read in Ecclesiastes, a time to speak and a time to be silent. And we see Jesus modeling that. Jesus is listening to them. These are the teachers of the law of Jewish tradition and Jewish law. He's listening, but he's also asking questions. And not just like little simple questions that you think a 12-year-old would ask, but these be deep questions that Jesus is asking them. I'm just curious, have you ever had that with a kid? Have you ever had a time when you were just amazed at a kid's understanding and answers? As I was reflecting on this, one of the things I had to do when I was in college was we had to teach a 3-day lesson. in the ag science department up at the State College High School. And so I did a small engine class, and we were doing it on gasoline and gas efficiency and such. And I remember developing a lab in which we had a couple small gas engines going. We were going to try to test the fuel efficiency of different octane rating gasoline. And so I had the small gas engine running for the whole class time. And as we got that running, I went in and we started talking about gasoline and just teaching about the basics of gasoline. One of the kids said, "Oh, it's like I forget." We got into organic chemistry. And I had taken an organic chemistry class, and I was like, huh, so you know a little bit about organic chemistry. All right, let's go into this hydrocarbon and what's that exactly happening and combustion reaction and all this other stuff. And it blew my mind away that you know there was a kid or two that had some basics in organic chemistry and could talk to me pretty intelligently about gasoline and hydrocarbons. And I was blown away. It was kind of fun. Getting to talk to them about that and actually using a class that was a requirement for me that I thought was it was a hard class too, and not one that I really enjoyed a lot, but being able to see some fruits from that class and bringing that out to a junior, sophomore, junior in high school. And yeah, it was fun. Just curious, has anyone ever had a interaction with a kid that just kind of blew yourself away with their understanding? It happens. And boy, when it does, it's fun. It's fun. It's neat to see what's in their minds and what they can discuss. It says in verse 47, everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. And so Jesus was taking the time to speak, and he was also taking time to listen. And there's another aspect here that kind of makes this a little bit amazing. There were some things that Jesus, because of who Jesus was and where he was born, that was kind of a detriment to him. Jesus was not born into a rich family. He was not from a prominent family or town. In fact, Nazareth was kind of seen as low level. You know, if you were going to be in the religious elite, you're going to be living in Jerusalem. You weren't going to be living in Galilee, and especially not in Nazareth. And Jesus was young. I mean, he was 12-year-old. He wasn't even, by the definition of their time, an adult, a man yet. You know, I don't know what our definition is. I would think either 18 or 21 would be our definition, probably for a man in our culture and society today. But even in Jesus' time, in his culture and society, he wasn't even seen and considered a man. He was still considered a boy. And so he had a lot of these things that weren't working, or that were working against him in interacting with these religious leaders, and yet he held their attention. And I don't know if he was there for 3 days straight or not. It wouldn't surprise me that he was. You know, what kind of preaching would you have to do, Steve, to have the attention span of people for 3 whole days?
Well, you better be mighty good. You better have lots of good stories.
Yeah, wouldn't that be amazing? 3
Yes.
days, you'd have to have lots of food too, and maybe some coffee or tea or something there, right?
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, it just I think about that in my teaching, you know, and boy, if I hadn't had the same people for 3 days straight, would I have enough content or interesting material to keep them amazed? And yet Jesus did, and I think that's a testament to you know, Jesus knowing who he was. It says that Jesus was filled with wisdom and the grace of God was upon him. But not only that, but just his home life. And I think we can't discount what Mary and Joseph provided for him there as well. As I was reflecting on this verse, I was thinking back to 1 Timothy. I really liked reading Timothy, 1 and 2 Timothy. Timothy was a younger guy, a younger preacher. And he was being mentored and encouraged by Paul, who was seen as, at that time, was an older gentleman, an older preacher. And when I read Timothy, I read it through the lens of someone older encouraging someone younger. And there was one verse that that got in my head, and I think applies here to what Jesus was doing at this time. Paul encourages Timothy with this in 1 Timothy 4, verse 12. Don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in life, in love, in faith, and in purity. And I think that's very, very true. Of course, Jesus was special. He's the Son of God, and he's perfect, and all that. But Jesus modeled a life that was a very good model for the religious leaders here at this time, and set that example. And I think that's part of this astonishment too. You have this 12-year-old boy who's coming in and can hold his own and asking questions and listening. I can't imagine a 12-year-old boy today going to theological school and listening to theological professors about all the nuts and bolts of theology and being interested in it. If there was a 12-year-old boy that was that, I think that would amaze some professors there as well. And so I just wanted us to get a picture of what's actually happening here and kind of seeing how Jesus fit in with that. Of course, his parents are on a different mindset, right? And we see that here in verse 48. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. His mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you." And I can just imagine them coming up here to the temple courts here and seeing Jesus there with the religious leaders around, and them not necessarily being, oh, he's holding the attention of these religious leaders. It's, hey, he's here. We found him. That elation. And not only that elation, but then also the reaction of, what's the matter with you?
Yeah.
Grabbing him and shaking him and saying, why did you do this to me, right? Can't you see yourself reacting? You'd have two polar opposite reactions right there if you were missing a child and you found him, you're very happy, but at the same time you want to knock some sense into them. I think we would react the same way here as Mary and Joseph did. But what do we learn about Jesus? What verse 49? What do we learn about Jesus as a 12-year-old here? He says, "Why were you searching for me?" What do we search for? For what things do we search for, Steve?
Something of value, something that we highly value.
Something that we highly value, sure. Yeah.
Something that we need.
Something that we need. There's one other thing I'm fishing for.
Oh, I still didn't hit it. Huh? Okay.
Yeah, you're right with what you said. What else do we search for? Steve, you were talking to Audrey about your hair.
Yeah.
Have you been searching for your hair?
That I'm missing it, yes.
That you're missing, that you lost, right?
Yep. Yeah, we search for lost things.
We search for lost things. Right. Yeah. Jesus says here, and he says, "Why were you searching for me?" Why? Almost saying, I wasn't lost. I was right where I was supposed to be, right? I find that interesting. Why were you searching for me? Why? He says, "Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house?" Jesus knows. For one thing, Jesus wasn't lost, and I think in his thinking, he knows who he is. Jesus knows that God is his Father, and that's one of the things I'd love to know about Jesus. Like, when did he know? When did he know that God was his Father and that he's the Son of God? But he knows that. He knows that right now. Obviously, with what he says here, he thought that Mary and Joseph would know where he's at. It wouldn't surprise me that Jesus lost track of time. When you do something that you're really passionate about and excited about, and you're really into, how many of us lose sense of time? Maybe not days. I don't know. I can't say I've lost track of days, but I've lost track of hours. Oftentimes when I'm doing something I like, I'm like, yeah, I guess it's late. It's time to stop. I think Jesus, he thought Mary and Joseph would know where he's at, and that he wasn't lost. And I think Jesus knows his role in life. I think at this point he knows what he needs to do, what he's supposed to be doing. I can't. I'm trying to think back to my 12-year-old self, and I didn't want to be. I mean, teaching wasn't on my radar at 12 years old, and so as a 12-year-old boy in middle school, what am I going to do with my life? But this 12-year-old boy Jesus did, and so we can learn a lot about Jesus here, just in how he responds to his parents. And what was the reaction from his parents? They didn't understand what he was saying. What do you mean? Why am I searching for you? You were lost, right? And they're not understanding this response that Jesus is giving. They're not understanding this wisdom, right? This wisdom and this knowledge from Jesus. There's a quote here in the commentary that boy, just it hit me here. It says, "Jesus' wisdom and knowledge of God's plans challenge everything that people believe." And I'll say that again. Jesus' wisdom and knowledge of God's plans challenge everything that people believe. Mary and Joseph believed that Jesus was lost, that he should have been with them. And Jesus is coming back and saying, "Hey, I was in my Father's house. I had to be in my Father's house. Why were you searching for me?" I like this quote, and I'm going to ponder on it here a little bit. Jesus' wisdom and knowledge of God's plans challenge everything that people believe. And as we dig into how Jesus lived his life and how we become followers of Jesus, I think that becomes truer and truer, especially in our society. Everything that people believe, Jesus' wisdom and knowledge of God's plans is going to challenge that. And I think you've heard stories, and you can think of stories of people who had their own plans in life and things that they were going to do, and Jesus came in and knocked them over, and the plans that God had laid out for them challenged their belief in what they were going to do. And boy, I like that. I like that. And a lot of times, God's plans, when they get knocked in our face, we don't understand them either. It takes a little bit. It takes a little bit of a relationship with God to finally see that God's plan for us was good and true. Just like Jesus not being with his parents going home. I like it. I like it. They did not understand what he was saying to them. But Jesus was also obedient because he knows the Jewish law. The 10 Commandments are part of that, and one of them is obeying your father and mother. And so we see here in 51, then he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. All right. I think there was something in the commentary here that says that following Jesus is not going to be necessarily stress-free and harm-free and problem-free, but I think there's a part of Jesus here as well that at least in this aspect right here, that he realizes the stress that he puts on his parents and doesn't want to continue to add to that stress. And so Jesus is obedient. Jesus is obedient at this time, and goes back to Nazareth with them. And we see here in verse 51, what's it say? But his mother treasured all these things in her heart, right? And it's not the first time that we see this. I think the first time that we see this is back in the traditional Christmas story in Luke 2, just a few verses back. In Luke 2, verse 19, it says, "But Mary treasured up all these things and pondered them in her heart." This is when the angels tell the shepherds that Jesus was born. The shepherds come in and see the baby. This this happens 12 years later, and we see Mary treasuring these things in her heart. The commentary says, after Jesus' death and resurrection, this commentator can just see Mary going about and telling stories of Jesus. And sure, one of these would probably be one of those stories. You remember back then when Jesus didn't come with us, and And we lost him for 3 days, and yet he was then schooling the religious leaders and all. Imagine that'd be a pretty cool story to tell, wouldn't it? It's just like my college professor going through that time of thinking he lost a kid on a train ride home from Kansas City. And here he's telling the story to new teachers and saying, make sure you know where your kids are at and always count them. I think that's part of this here, that Mary treasuring all these things in her heart. She knows that this boy is different, this boy is special, and building up these stories so that she can tell them after Jesus died and rose again. And what do we see last then in 52? We see this. And Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and men. Jesus' wisdom continued to grow. It wasn't just a once and done thing here. So in conclusion, I'm just going to read this conclusion part here in the commentary. It says, how do we comprehend something that is fundamentally different from every other thing with which we have experience? Ecclesiastes speaks of the regularity of life cycles, showing the wisdom of understanding circumstances. Luke shows Jesus' uniqueness and how Jesus defied the conventional wisdom of those cycles as he spoke in the temple at age 12. But Jesus' words come to us as the first divine revelation from his lips. At the time, the uniqueness of his identity began to build. As people called into fellowship with Jesus, Christians are to follow God's purpose in mundane, daily ways that can give way suddenly to our saying and doing the unexpected. For us to expect to do only and always the unusual is not God's way. Even so, God's will can run counter to conventional expectations on many occasions. Expect the world to scold us for defying its expectations as we continue to follow in the surprising direction of Jesus' footsteps. And I think that's a good way of ending this. We were talking about, and you can reflect on your own experiences here during these last 4 months and all the disruptions and other things that have come from it. But boy, can we find the silver lining and things that maybe Jesus wanted us to find during this time. And one of the things that I reflect on this is I had to put tests and quizzes and all that stuff for our classes online. And I tell you what, I really liked it. I like having tests online, and I'm going to continue doing that. And it's just something really, really small. But I like that last part there. The surprising direction of Jesus' footsteps. If we're following that, it might be disruptive to our cycles and our rhythms. But the thought to remember here is being about our Heavenly Father's business is our task, no matter what's thrown at us, whether it's the rhythm and cycle of everyday life, or if it's something out of the blue and knocks us on our feet like what we've experienced these last 4 months. So let's take encouragement in that and continue to follow Jesus no matter what happens. Any final thoughts or comments?
Times of disruption can be a blessing.
Right. And I tell you what, that comes really, it comes better from someone who's experienced it. That word of advice than someone who's had their whole life together and say, well, times of disruption can be a blessing. Well, you've never had your life disrupted, so how do you know? But, for someone that if you can share stories when your life has been disrupted and the blessing that comes from that, it goes a long way, doesn't it? Yes. Yeah. I like it. Well, thank you. I appreciate your discussion and interaction, and continue to read.
Thank you, Ryan.
And don't become weary like Ecclesiastes 12 says, right?
That's right. That's right. Thanks, Ryan.
Yep. Hey, thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Yep.